welcome to Comic Watch, your source for your home for media, comic book media, news, and reviews. I am John. Jack Cody White had to bail to go hang out at Chuck E. Cheese with a bunch of children, so I will be hosting the show today. I am joined by our fellas. Say your names.
Nicholas from Carthage, Texas.
Brian from Arizona. We're going to have an interesting show. There's already been a ton of debates about some of the books that we're about to review.
Yeah, but half the people who debated aren't here. It's me versus Nick now. It's cool. It's going to be fun. What do you got for news, Mr. RB?
It's kind of been a slow news week for comic book industry. However, the only news that I think that we can discuss was that Brazil blocked the gay kiss adventures. What was it? Children's Crusade?
Mm-hmm.
Which came out in 2010, 2011 era. But they ended up blocking the kiss, which is kind of weird.
It's a bit of closing the barn door after the horse got out, if you ask me. Especially now that the internet exists.
So that was interesting. And of course, you can always go to our website, www.comic-watch.com, for more news, fan review, and all that good jazz. But that's really all I have. Do you guys want to talk about anything in particular?
I don't think so. So we got a fairly quick show for you this week. This week we are going to be talking about the landmark Spawn 300, which is the second ever creator-owned series ever to hit 300 issues, with the first being Cerberus by Sergio Aragonés some years ago. I should have looked up the actual year, but I didn't. And then the second is going to be Legion of Superheroes Millennium #1. Nick, you want to go ahead and give us walk us into Spawn 300?
Yeah, definitely. So first, this one kind of brought together a huge creative team. It had Todd McFarlane as writer and inker, Greg Capullo as pencils. He's back finally. J. Scott Campbell, Jerome Pena, Scott Snyder joined in to write. Jason Sean Alexander is in it. And, of course, the all-time great letterer, Tom Orzechowski. This issue kind of epitomizes something great for the series. And like John said, it is the record-tying 300 issue for the creator-owned series. Spawn 301 is going to look to break the record. So it's had a lot of hype going into it from Image and McFarlane and company. So there was a lot going into this one. And the road to 300 has been something that's been marketed from them. It's something that we've been following. If you've been following my reviews at Comic Watch, it's something I'm super excited for. But now that it's here, it's supposed to open up something entirely new for the series. And in all honesty, I think it does that pretty well, because it capitalizes on a fundamental point that some contributors here at Comic Watch have taken issue with, which is the death of Wanda. And they touch on that in this issue, but it serves as a catalyst to push Spawn in this new direction that he's taking as a superhero. And it's something I thought it was interesting, because when people ask McFarlane when Spawn's going to end, he always replies, when is Batman going to end? Nobody's asking when that series is going to end. And even though he does have something in mind, he has this idea of Spawn that it is this character that will exist outside of him and will continue on as his legacy. And it's been a crazy legacy. Spawn is this cultural influence now, especially in the action horror genre, that I think is something people have almost come to depend on. It's the constant with Image Comics now. I mean, Spawn is there, and with The Walking Dead gone, I thought that was going to give it its run for one of Image's longest running, but Spawn just continues going. So with issue 300, it's structured in a series of short stories, but they all impact one another and flow pretty well together. So we start off with an introduction to a character named Nyx and her boyfriend, and they're taking through that ride, and it's pretty violent introduction for what it is. It was something that I really wasn't sure was happening. There's some obvious visuals happening with the redneck and the bright red hat who's bullying all these kids, and it gives them this idea to get revenge and make people really talk about something. And then we transition into the continuation of Spawn's plans. So he's found the location in Albania where he comes across both Violator and Godsend, and their clash, it's classic Spawn action. So where the first story kind of is more along the lines of what we've seen recently in the horror thriller aspect, it changes and goes back to pretty classic Spawn action with Violator and Godsend. It ends with basically the removal of his costume that has long been considered the source of his power. And they make the point pretty obviously that the costume doesn't make Spawn. And with him reorganizing himself and, shoving the glass in his fist and all that stuff, he says, I am Spawn. And I thought this was something that also played into the whole superhero genre twist that he's wanting to push. And getting a bit of feedback. Testing?
Okay. RB, are you muted?
But now that we've got, then after the superhero twist sort of the removing of his costume, and we see that Al Simmons is he is Spawn. It's not some symbiote that makes him his powers. Like, there's been all these twists, and we see that after all these revelations.
I would love it if he fell over dead the next second. He's like, I am Spawn. Wait, no, I'm not.
We almost weren't sure what's happening because there's at the beginning he reveals to Mark that it's not the costume, that he goes through all these different forms, and he's like, this is who I really am, even without all the visuals that you usually see me with. So it's taken a while for Al to get to this point and to discover what the true extent of his powers are. I think that's something McFarlane has played with often in how to continue the story, because his power set just keeps evolving and changing. But speaking towards that, we follow that story with the Redeemer, who, if you're following from last issue, got taken into the darkness, and we finally find out what happens with that. He becomes the Reaper, and a reveal that we're sure to follow up on next issue. But from that, we have a few stories. The villains come back under this new master. Then we get J. Scott Campbell's awesome story of Nyx returns, that she gets resurrected by Jessica Priest and becomes She-Spawn. And then the cliffhanger is a character we're not too sure of who enters this dark foreboding temple. And together, when they're read together, they really present this new direction for Spawn that I think is interesting, because it explores what Wanda told Al on her dying breath around issue 260. I believe it was 262 or 263, that it's time to be a hero. And he's been working his way towards this approach to becoming a hero, but he still hasn't really found his place in it. But as we approach the road to 300, you could tell that he had found that place. It just wasn't revealed. And now that 300 is hit, the big reveal is really his confidence in who he is and his power set and what he's able to do, and how he's able to bear being a hero in this world that kind of he's helped create. So he's taken on this new responsibility where it's not just trying to redeem the death of his wife or try to find his wife from before, his family. It's him taking on the role of being this hero for Earth and for humans, and fighting this war that he has been caught in the middle of, but also progressed to crazy proportions. And there are a lot of people that, they have discounted Spawn over the years simply because, he had his time in the 90s and it's not people's cup of tea, that type of writing. But if you're following along with this is some of the best Spawn that has occurred in years. I was hoping Jason Sean Alexander would get more of a highlight because he's been one of my favorite artists on the series, but ultimately it was just really awesome to see this series come together and to pull off this big achievement. And it's going to continue in issue 301 where we follow through with some of these revelations of, Violator actually killing Wanda and what the Reaper is going to do now that he's no longer the Redeemer and what role She-Spawn's going to play into all of this. But all of these are critical elements in this story that have been moving for some time, but now make total sense and help push the story forward in a super interesting way. And it's a landmark issue because of all these revelations. These are stories that have been progressing for some time now, and it's a testament to this creative team that they were able to do something so awesome and bring together Capullo back with Snyder or with McFarlane, and then bring in Snyder to write a story. There's just really, really awesome elements that I think hold up with the series really well because they're genuine to the character and they feel coherent with the story that's been told so far. And it also sets it up in a pretty fresh direction going forward for hopefully another 300 super awesome issues. John, I'm sure you have a counterpoint. What did you think?
I thought it was an acceptable issue. I'm not the biggest Spawn fan, like, at all. I did read the first 25 issues of Spawn multiple times, actually. I have the first few trades. Basically, I've always just wanted to see what all the fuss was about. I do not think Spawn is a great character. I don't think he's written well. I think it's a fine character design that is used to push a really just grimdark mid-90s stereotypical narrative that feels like it hasn't evolved in the slightest in the past 27 years. I feel like I read the first 25 issues of Spawn, and if this were number 26 in 1995, I wouldn't have felt like I missed a beat. like obviously there are things like Wanda's death that, if Wanda died in number 25 and this happened in 26, it would have been just smooth sailing. It wouldn't have felt like this was, oh man, that was a real joke. Like, if you're reading Dixon era Batman and then jump into Tom King's Batman, there is a marked difference. Like, even Snyder's Batman and Grant Morrison's Batman, like.
Did you also not notice like the difference of, you don't see any hell or heaven. These are all people who are locked in the Earth realm, and that's something that plays into the Armageddon story and all that's happened that totally changed.
Well, you didn't spend in those first 25 issues. You didn't spend a lot of time in hell or heaven. Like, you spent time dealing with them, but you didn't really, like, there were vignettes that would take place in hell or heaven, or like an issue here, an issue there, but the vast majority of it was taking place in New York, I think it was New York City.
Yeah, like especially like the first 50 issues were a lot of his journey with like dealing with Malboja and stuff, and as we closed in on issue 100, a lot of that came into how he dealt with that going to hell and stuff, and even the death of Wanda, he got caught into all of that. So it's interesting that you feel like you didn't notice a shift when there's this fundamental shift in how the world operates, and that didn't convey in issue 300 because, why isn't their source of power evident in heaven and hell with these competing forces? And that's
they definitely mentioned the necroplasm counter, which was a big thing early on in the series. They mentioned it being reset, so it's like, well, I mean, I guess we're back where we were last time I was reading Spawn. Okay. Which, if there's a jumping on point for someone who was a Spawn fan and maybe hasn't been following it, I guess this would be a jumping on point. And it, as like you were saying, it does seem like it's a new direction for the character, which is cool. But like I said, it feels like this book is kind of stuck in like 1994, 95 in a lot of ways. Art was great, but art was never a problem with Spawn. Image in general was it was founded by a handful of artists who wanted a fair shake on their characters. who were inventing characters and not getting the rights to them, looking at Cable, stuff like that, Venom, Carnage, what have you. And so they saw that Marvel mainly, but also DC, were just making money hand over fist with their creations, and realized they could turn that around. So art was never a problem for Image, but to me, Image always was years ago was always. It's actually gotten a lot better. It's a totally different animal nowadays, but for a long time, it felt like Image was the epitome of style over substance in a lot of books, especially really early on. Not all of the books, but a lot of the books. Early Stormwatch, stuff like that. It's like if they just picked 5 gritty ass character designs and then plotted a book around them. And that's always what Spawn felt like, as well. And I don't know. I mean, I suppose it's evolved past that. I did like the cybernetic ape because I'm a sucker for apes. All in all, I didn't think it was an awful book. It's not really for me. But I will say, if you read, and I keep throwing out pretty mainstream or big name, but if you read Action 700 and then Action 1000, there's a huge amount of distance between those issues. I don't feel like Spawn #1 is that different from Spawn #300, and I think that's what I was took most issue with Spawn 300. It was a fine book. We don't do number grades on the podcast, but I've been saying if I gave it a number grade, it'd probably be like a 8.75. It's not awful. It's not. To me, it's not groundbreaking. But it's a fine book, and if you like Spawn, you might like it, if you like Spawn, you will like it. And if you like Spawn before, you might want to check it out. How about we'll say that. Arby, what do you think about
it? Spawn 300. First of all, no, I'm just kidding. It was actually not a bad book at all. I've never read a Spawn book before, so my only reference from it is probably the 90s HBO animated series and the movie. And that's pretty much all I know, and I don't even think I've ever finished Spawn movie. But I felt like reading, when I picked up 300, I was able to...
He wins.
Right, all superheroes win. When I read, or I forgot what... Damn it, JJ, you got me all flustered now. No, so when I picked it up 300, read it, I felt like I didn't miss anything, like JJ was saying earlier. I think if you want to jump on Spawn, here's a great point or starting point. I don't think you'll miss anything. Also, I was far more interested in the first story about the girlfriend and the boyfriend when they went to go get married, blah, blah, blah. And then when they came back, that's what I wanted to read.
That's an awesome story, right?
Right. No, I was like, give me more of that. And then Spawn came, and I was like, I don't care. Give me more of the other stuff. So Spawn was fine. I think I enjoyed it probably better than most of the people on the podcast, or at least people that were going to be on the podcast. It was a fine book. If you're a Spawn lover or demons and hell and heaven and all that good jazz or bad jazz, depending on your view, check it out. You'll probably like it. That's all I got, really.
Yeah, so I
did actually have one thing, Nick, because you mentioned the uncle, and it's funny because I took a total different takeaway from that than you did, and I think there might have been some level of projection because I, as a functioning adult, am beginning to slowly hate teenagers. So I was sitting there Uncle's got a point. he's like, you damn kids over there smoking whatever you're smoking. Why don't you get over here and talk to your grandma? I'm like, that sounds like something I might say to my nephew or something. You know, I didn't take a.
But it was like the color
Yeah.
red was super striking through all of those pages, and I think it was obviously on purpose the way they emphasized that color. It was also his demeanor, as he's a man, he can take it and stuff like that.
Yeah,
He was
that's
really
true.
like hitting those notes that it's not obvious, but it's also something that I don't put past McFarlane and company to slip in there.
Oh,
yeah.
I do think we need to start taking red hats back. I don't know why. It sucks that the red hat is stolen. I don't have any good red hats anymore anyway. But I think we need to work on like getting these red hats back in our arena.
Like,
Brian, you're muted.
One interesting point that Brian made was almost in a side comment that all superheroes win. And I think that gets to a point that is this underlying issue that we almost have with an indie comic and not with big two superheroes like Batman and Superman or Iron Man or whoever you want. It's a part of when you introduce somebody to these comics is, yeah, superheroes are always going to win. So when you enter this story, you have to get accustomed to the idea that it's not about just them winning, it's about how they win and what they do to achieve those results. Because the ending is Batman's going to punch the villain and he's going to save Gotham, because that's what Batman does. And Spawn touches on those notes where this story can be reoccurring for a very long time because he's set up in a way like these superhero characters, especially now with this new twist, that he can achieve that type of storytelling, and it's not a circular narrative any more so than these big two superheroes that have been going for Batman like 80 years now. So it's interesting that we put that onto Spawn, that like where has he come, and where has Batman come? He's still the deranged boy who lost his parents, who dresses up as a bat and punches villains. And Spawn is still the Hellspawn warrior trying to find his place in this war between heaven and hell and his role in humanity. And we're exploring that.
In fairness, Batman has been effectively continuity reset 4 times since Spawn's existed. I will say within the space of 27 years, if you go from like the end of Crisis to 2011, in that time Batman, died, and by the end of that, Dick Grayson was Batman. There was progression.
Yeah, totally. And same with Spawn, because I believe it was Mark who filled in as Spawn, who, when Al Simmons was out, we have these transitions, and it's great exploring it like that because you see how they align and you see what McFarlane's injecting into this type of storytelling, because it really is set up similar to that. And it's interesting because a lot of people who don't read superhero comics or comics in general come into them, and it's one of the first complaints that they have. My wife was one of them, in that, how are you reading 80, 100 issues of this run when the ending is they're gonna defeat the bad guys and move on to the next one. And it's very much
how they defeat the bad guys.
In this one, it's Spawn. It's how he defeats them, and he gets his costume ripped off, so he shoves this glass and stuff down his knuckles, and he is Spawn. That's what I want to see. It's not about just him winning.
That's what you want to see?
Yeah, it's badass, and that's what I want to see from Spawn. And I think it's interesting. We've discussed that circular narrative a lot.
What that scene was, that when he was shoving things, that was just him, like their creator showing that he's a Barbie doll. That's all we saw.
Yeah. I like I said, it'd be really funny if next issue is the next, like a minute later, and he just passes out from blood loss. He's like, I'm not Spawn. I'm done. I will say you made a good point earlier when you were talking about an action movie. Like, does it hamper your enjoyment of an action movie when you're 45 minutes in and there's a shootout, knowing that the movie's another hour long? And that's a good way to think about it. And that's yeah.
Yeah, because it's not going to be the most intelligent book that you find. And Doomsday Clock just came out. This is not that book. and it's never tried to be. It doesn't want to be. That's nothing that it's ever set out to achieve. It very much knows what it is. And this is an oversized book of something that knows what it is, and it's a team of artists who just kill it. And they're not trying to be something different. It's this badass action movie that you want to have a good time with and have tons of fun. And that's okay for that to exist alongside Doomsday Clock, that you're going to get depth and this intellectual engagement out of. Like, I'm here for both of those. And they're equally great in different ways.
Absolutely. I think everybody feeling good about Spawn 300?
Totally.
Yeah? RB, you got anything else to say?
No, go to your local comic book store and pick up Spawn 300. Also, check out our review at comic-watch.com.
Or if, like me, you are not a Spawn fan, you can buy 2 other comic books of your choosing for the same price. All right, so if that's all we have for the Spawn 300, next on the docket is going to be Legion of Superheroes, or not in this book, and Millennium, #1, by Brian Michael Bendis, with artists, a great variety of artists that I would have loved to have written down, but I know Dustin Nguyen was among them, Andrea Sorrentino, Ryan Sook did not draw anything, but there might have been others. There were others. But so we find out who Bendis's mysterious immortal woman going up through the annals of time is. And of course, it is a character that he has shoehorned into his Action Comics run in the last few issues. It is none other than Rosen Thorn, who has never been immortal at any point before. It is explained at one point as, I don't know, it was something Thorn did, and I don't remember it. But that is that. So we begin with a short. It's kind of similar to Spawn 300 in that it's a series of vignettes set at different points in time. Although I guess those weren't points in time. But it's Thorn, or Rose and Thorn, immortal, traveling up through time. Beginning with a near-ish future where Supergirl is present, where she's talking to Supergirl. Great excuse for a couple trademark Jim Lee splash pages, which do look very nice. Then we jump ahead to Batman Beyond Neo Gotham. She's fighting the bad guys from the first episode of the animated series, which does make me wonder how much research Bendis actually did into Batman Beyond. And she incapacitates Batman Beyond using a little metal ball that she taps against him, and he freezes up and then falls over, which is silly in itself. Later, Batman Beyond is unmasked, and it is not quite clear which Batman Beyond it is, be it Tim or Damian or Terry. It could be any of the three. Knowing Bendis, it's probably Terry. A fairly inconsequential conversation is had. Doesn't really matter. And then we fast forward past the Great Disaster, which, I would have loved to stop in the Great Disaster, because it's never really been explored, the Great Disaster itself, but we just skimmed right by it to dip into Commandi Country. And Rose meets the last boy on Earth and his ape friend. She decapitates his ape friend. This section is drawn by Andrea Sorrentino, who interestingly also showed an ape being violently decapitated in a recent Avengers issue, which makes coincidence? I think not. She puts on a Superman suit and, interestingly, in conjunction with Spawn 300, discovers that the powers are not actually contained within the suit. Also an interesting little wraparound there. We blow through all of that. I think she steals the super suit. Maybe she doesn't. I don't know. Commandi was there. It was neat. And then we go forward some more. How do you go forward past the Great Disaster, you ask? I don't know either. But we jump into the land of Tommy Tomorrow. Tommy Tomorrow may as well be an information kiosk.
I'm gonna be filming up to this. Do you need to let out? Are you gonna be here for a while?
I'm not leaving.
Wait, cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry. Xfinity truck. It's the perils of recording in your truck. Um, but Tommy tomorrow may as well be an information kiosk or a cursory Google search for all the information he gives us. And as he threatens repeatedly to call space security, the Space Force, Space Force, that's a thing now? It's finally happened. The Space Police. He calls the Space Police, and Thorne runs off yelling, or Rose runs off yelling things back at him, and we get the teaser. Next issue, the Legion of Superheroes. It is a little bit unfortunate that a book titled Legion of Superheroes finishes with a cliffhanger of next issue we get the Legion of Superheroes. I am reminded of Superman 14's issue title, The Unity Saga Conclusion, Part 1. So now we get Prologue Part 1. What did you think of Prologue Part 1, Mr. Nick?
I'm sort of glad you had that recap there, because ultimately this is a pretty forgettable issue. And it's not that hard to remember what happened in Spawn, because things happened. And they make you want to talk about them. I put this book down and I just wanted to find something different. And I think John definitely hit the nail on the head. The disappointment of picking up a book titled Legion of Superheroes Millennium, and there's no Legion of Superheroes to be found. I mean, what are we supposed to do with this? What were the expectations that we would receive this book anything other than disappointed? And I would love to quote, since our beloved Matt is not here, he could not join us tonight. He recently reviewed Legion of Superheroes at comic-watch.com. It's such a great review because he frames the discussion that needs to be had around this book in an interesting way. But he ultimately boils it down to just one issue in, and the Bendis era of Legion is already in a lot of trouble. And I think that sort of encapsulates my thoughts on this, in that, yeah, it's a hyped book. This is the return of the Legion. He's been hyping it. Bendis, the creative team, DC, this has been something that has excited fans for some time now. And when you get the book finally and it's nothing really what you wanted, what are you supposed to do? Are you supposed to come back for the next one and hoping that the first one was just a coincidence, or not going to be a trend for this series? Because starting off on a foot like this is not good, and it doesn't bode well for the future, because you have to hook readers, and this book is not a hook for this Legion of Superheroes team, this resurgence of this team in DC Comics lore. This is what you're hinging this hook on, and it's not a solid book. It feels a bit sloppy. It's uninteresting. I heard somebody mention that it's based on a character that nobody really knows, but Bendis cares a lot about. And
Rose and Thorne.
Yep.
I know them. Or her. It's one person.
And admittedly, I did not know them, so I came into this book pretty unaware of what was going on, and it caught you up on her story pretty well. I finished the issue. I knew about her, and I knew what was going on, what her deal was, but I didn't care.
Did you though? What's her power set?
Yeah, this duality. I get what they're getting at with her.
She's She-Hulk. Is basically what he wrote her as.
Yeah, but that's the thing, is I get it, but I don't care. And why should I care? Because this book didn't do anything to make me care. As a reader coming in that doesn't, have that backlog of information, they had to do something to hook readers, and I could not find it. I read this book 2 times. I stopped, I put it down, I read another book, and I thought maybe I was wrong. So I picked it up, and halfway through, I was like, nope.
Oh, that's a fatal mistake.
It was, because I thought maybe they're getting at something that I just need to to be along for the ride in, and I'm not. Like, I'm just ultimately not, and it sucks. At the end of the day, like, you don't want a book to turn out like this. Been hyped about it. I mean, people at Comic Watch even, we've been talking about it. Everybody loves Legion. Matt was so incredibly excited. So his disappointment with this series is palpable, and you feel it in the review because yeah, this was a big moment, and it sputtered and kind of got off to a bad start. So that's a disappointment. John, what do you think?
um, I I'm apparently at a loss for words. um, it's really hard to express how disappointed I am in this book. Not only does it not feature the Legion of Superheroes whose names are on the cover, it features multiple characters that I like portrayed crappily. um, it's such a half measure kind of book, and to top it off, one thing that I've always liked about the futures of DC, the various varied futures of DC, from Kamandi to DC 1 Million to Batman Beyond to even Tommy Tomorrow, who's a Golden Age character who I don't. Well, actually, no, wait. He showed up in Superboy in the New 50. Like, not him, but a bastardized, horrible version of him. Uh, but yeah, it's a Golden Age. He's doing the Golden Age version of him, basically. He's just a you know space guy in back when sci-fi books were big in the 50s. Um, but as I said repeatedly, he's portrayed with all the charm of of an automated information kiosk. Um, um, it's not great, and I think I'm one of maybe like four people in the country who care about how Tommy Tomorrow is portrayed ever. But just that, it was like the most minor thing. Commandi's always kind of off. Commandi's been, he was originally written by Jack Kirby, and then there was he showed up in some stuff. He was in Commandi at World's End, which was super 90s, unnecessarily grim and weird. Had giant Superman. I think that was all giant Superman, the beard and the gun. Um, good stuff. But just in the way as I said, Batman Beyond, he literally had characters from the first episode of the animated series. Like, which makes me wonder, like, did he read any comics? Did he watch one episode of the animated series on DC Universe? Did he? Which would be just par for the Bendis course. And I will say I have a lot of comics from the 90s with Rosenthorn in them, but I've been on a serious Superman buying kick, but I haven't caught up with as many as I've bought. I've got like 600 or 700 issues between 86 and 11 for Superman alone. So I don't know exactly what her power set is exactly, but I think she's schizophrenic, and when she turns into Thorn, she has super strength and possibly heightened invulnerability. But yeah, like I said, he's basically portraying her as She-Hulk, who randomly will whip out a piece of tech, like randomly having a thing to stop Batman Beyond. It's so weird. Like, oh, knew you were coming. Click. Just hits the off switch. That's the end. That's it. Fight over. What was that? That was exciting. Also, the art in the Batman Beyond section, when they were in costume, looked good. But when he got out, Batman, or whoever the Batman was, as I said, it wasn't really clearly said whether it was Terry or one of the other ones. I'm tired. but it wasn't clearly said which one it was. So, they looked weird. At one point, there was one panel where he looked like an old cantaloupe that you left on the side of the road. It was rough, I tell you. So all in all, I did not like this book. Does it gives me like really, I already kind of had a bad feeling about the future of Bendis on Legion, and this kind of just clinched it. Will I read Bendis Legion? Yeah, probably. I'll check it out. But if it's anything like this, it's not going to matter. Well, I mean, nothing really matters when you think about it. It's just a comic book. RB, what'd you think of Legion of Superheroes Millennium #1?
So, I don't know what happened in that book. I read it. I couldn't tell you. I mean, Rose Thorn is probably the only thing that I remember. The one thing I will say is the art was really good, but it did kind of seem inconsistent at times. Not that the art was bad in either side of it, but you can tell when you have a lot of artists working on certain pages that you can kind of pick up that it's not as consistent if you have the same kind of artist, etc. At least that's my takeaway. I didn't actually even know that it was several artists until John Jay was kind of mentioning it, and Bendis likes to do that, have a bunch of artists do different pages. As a reviewer, it's a pain in the butt when we have to put all of them into our thing, but hey. So that was my only takeaway from the book. That's the only thing.
Annuals, am I right?
Yeah, right.
When they do annuals and there's like 7 artists on there, you're like, oh, damn it.
Right. I'll be like, I forgot this.
I don't know any of them.
Yeah. So I haven't ever read anything related to it before. This is maybe a good jumping on point because I don't know anything, and it sounds like people who know the book sounds like they're still lost, that they don't know what's going on either. But it's a Bendis book, which usually if he puts a puzzle together, and this would just seem like a bad puzzle piece, and it didn't get me interested, unfortunately. And it's only 1 out of 2, so it's there's nothing that made me want to be like, oh, I'm jumping on to the next one. Everybody's looking at me weird. I think it's 1 of 2, right?
It is.
Yeah, so I mean, there's nothing that made me want to be like, I want to know the end of this story. No, it's fine. It's great. Nothing.
And what can possibly be resolved in 1 issue? Like, that's the issue with 2-parters. Like, if you didn't do a good job of laying your framework in the first issue and have a good solid lead into the second issue, like, when you're writing, a story should be done in 3 acts, you know, like, and be an arc, and so he should be halfway through the second act by the end of this issue. And
it's pretty obvious he chose to not follow that structure because at the end of #2, you might get a couple of answers, but you're definitely going to get this key to check out the next continuation of this story in another series. And
yeah, and knowing Bendis, he might consider Legion #1 Part 3.
Yeah, and honestly, like, I don't even know the question that I want answered in #2.
Well, exactly.
One thing I want to know is which Batman is it? Is it Terry?
We're never going to find out because it's Bendis. That's the thing.
Right. Like, even if I read #2, I'm not confident that I would get the answer. Also,
no, we're going to go to the end of time. So, you know, Justice Legion A, you know, DC 1 million, and then we're going to hit, you know, whatever the source, maybe the New Gods, Metron at the end of time, some such nonsense.
Yeah,
not unlike Mark Waid's History of the Marvel Universe with Franklin Richards and Galactus at the end of time, and you know, tell them a story.
Since we're talking about Batman Beyond, that was an awesome animated story that you guys can watch on DC Universe. At least
there's also a current comic series with pretty shaky art, but it's pretty good story by Dan Jurgens.
Yeah.
Like,
Jurgens
I
has written a
always,
lot of Batman Beyond. You'd be surprised.
I definitely always enjoy this show. For one reason is that it creates a fun comparison between the books that we do that I can't help but do because I do a bit of research as we go into it. I read these books back to back. And it's interesting in this one because you have two pretty hyped books. And it's fun to see the execution and the fan perception and how it sets up things for the future because ultimately it feels like one book succeeded and one book didn't. And you could almost pinpoint this to issues with the big two and what they're trying to do with their publishing methods. Like I touched on the end of Legion #2. You're definitely going to get this hint that you need to buy tons more. You're not getting that with Spawn. This has been, like what you're getting in Spawn. Like you've signed up for this, you know what you're getting. And these two books that have a lot of hype surrounding them, a lot of expectations. It's interesting to see one succeed in what it sets out to do, and then one completely fail.
Totally. And of the two, Spawn is the far superior book, and I barely even liked Spawn.
And that's definitely saying something. And I find myself leaning towards that more often lately because the big two right now they're about setting up what's definitely going to come in the future that you got to check out, but it's not right here. And Spawn 300, yeah, Spawn 301 is coming, but there's a lot that happens in this one, and they're not putting you behind this tease that there's more to come. And these series fall prey to that so often. Like Legion, like there's always such greater things to come. And
yeah,
it's exhausting.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm gonna read the second issue of this because free PDFs and stuff. But of the two, if I were buying comics at the store, of the two, and again, I wasn't that into Spawn, but of the two that we were talking tonight, if there's one that laid seeds that made me want to read further on more, it would be Spawn. And that's saying something because I didn't even like that book again.
And that's storytelling. Ultimately, whether it's the writer, the artist, this is storytelling. That's what these books are meant to do. And goodness, the Legion of Superheroes did not do that. It was just and it's sad. Like you don't want that to happen, but in doing both of these books, I noticed that their goals were ultimately, to capitalize on this hype because there's a lot of expectations around it. And
one thing I just realized, was she like in a bubble and then waking up every 150 years or so? Like, was she not in the world when the great disaster happened and then was in the aftermath with Kamandi, having lived there for 75 years? Was she not in Tommy Tomorrow's Land, having watched humanity rise back up and then develop all this technology again? Was she not in Neo Gotham, having watched Gotham turn into Neo Gotham? Why is she confused and surprised by her surroundings when she has been there the entire time?
One of many, many questions that are never going to get answered as we explore the timeline of DC as narrated by Bendis and company. So, yeah, you're not going to get these answers.
Oh, and the last thing I forgot to say, because there were a few of them. One thing that was always interesting about DC's possible futures, be them, Rock of Ages or Futures End, Kingdom Come, Batman Beyond, DC 1 Million, is they existed as possible futures or futures, especially after Multiversity. Batman Beyond was made out to be Earth 12, I want to say. Kingdom Come is Earth 21. Like, a lot of these futures are established. Kamandi was Earth 51? No, that was Wildstorm. Kamandi might have been 50. But what I'm saying is, what this does is, in drawing a straight line between all of these, is it puts them in order, gives them prescience over each other. It takes something that didn't need to be We didn't need a map drawn of this. like, like you don't need you don't need to take all the Elseworlds tales and then draw a rigid structure between them all of how they all work in conjunction with each other. Although that's kind of what Multiversity does at points. Um,
And I think that's like DC's exploring that with the metaverse. They're shifting how the DC universe is perceived and how it operates. And I think a lot of these stories are trying to tie into that. But I believe it was Cody who had mentioned that DC feels like it's almost in a rut as it waits for Doomsday Clock to wrap up and for these revelations to really impact the rest of their titles. And this book kind of falls right in line with that perception that it's spinning
well, I
its wheels.
think this book is kind of proof that the DC has stopped waiting for Doomsday Clock with its completely unreliable release schedule. I think they were treading water for a while, but I think they have stopped doing that now. What with the Legion launching and both the JSA being back in Justice League and the Legion being back in Superman are things that Didio said were not happening until Doomsday Clock ended.
That's
so.
interesting. But it's
So-
almost kind of sad that this is supposed to be them kicking it into gear, and then you come across Legion that has no Legion in it.
Mhm. Well, the thing about it is this is treading water for Legion. Legion #1 comes out probably the same week or a week after Doomsday Clock is supposed to come out and finish.
Okay.
I wonder when that JSA title's launching. Probably
I
after
can't wait
that.
for that.
So they might just be giving us the tease, they might just be giving us the little, they might be giving us the tease, and then they're going to string us along for 2 months, because that's what big publishers like to do. And then when it falls into their plans, which they were planning all along, they're finally doing it. They're finally doing it. So they released, I guess that makes actually complete and total sense, that they released a one-shot with no Legion in it. And then maybe the next one will have Legion in it. Maybe it won't, though, because it's Bendis. But if it doesn't, then Legion will come out. I mean, assuming Doomsday Clock comes out when it's supposed to, which, I don't think it will. Whatever. Does anybody else have any thoughts on Legion? No, let's never speak of it again.
I'm done with that one.
Forever. I might not need. I'm having second thoughts about reading #1 when it comes out after that. I'll still read it. So that brings us to our last segment. What have you been reading? What are you looking forward to, Mr. Nick?
Well, I will continue the trend of probably 10 episodes now or something of that of Valiant Comics. I am still in that deep dive, and our resident Valiant expert, Kenneth, has graciously allowed me to take over Livewire coming up in issue number 11. So I'll be doing reviews over that, and I wanted to catch up on all things Livewire. So the first one in my collection that I had was Unity. And
Unity!
it is beautiful. And I didn't know she had such a big role in the story, so it worked out really well.
She's huge in that book. It's great. It's so good.
Really, I fell into something really awesome that it's Valiant. Why am I so surprised?
Have you gotten to volume 2 of that yet, or are you still on volume 1?
Yes, I'm reading through volume 2 right now.
Oh, volume 2, it gets so good with the Harada stuff and stuff.
Yes, yes.
Crazy.
Because they said they take Livewire and put her in a totally new position because Harada was her mentor and everything. And now I'm finally starting to see how her and Ninjak come together, how he extended the hand, and I love it. And honestly, like I will constantly praise Valiant Comics. What they're doing now is just insane. Matt Kent is quickly becoming one of my favorite writers. Every title I've read from him with Valiant has just been amazing. And I love his work. He's a writer that he reminds me of reading Snyder's Batman for the first time, that I just cannot put them down. And I love it. So while diving into all things Livewire, I discovered something that I loved more of these characters than I thought, because you get a lot of EXO in it. Not as much Ninjak as I wanted, but I already loved him. So it was good to explore these characters and then really
In
take a
team books, Ninjak seems to be like a back burner kind of character. Like even when he's with the team, he's not like in the same room as the team. You know what I
I
mean?
noticed like Unity functioning like that for a team called Unity. When they achieve their goal, they're always spread apart. They're always doing
Yeah.
their own mission and like they coalesce it to something. And I thought that was super interesting. That I
Well, it's
noticed it
interesting
while
that it's such a varied team. You know, like with it's Harada and Eternal Warrior and Livewire and Ninjak at first. Like,
yeah it really is a wild team that you're not sure how they're going to function together,
mhm.
and it feels like they're even figuring it out as they go.
And
But
then they end up not really working out in a lot of ways by the second trade.
like you kind of
But
get
it ends
that
up
feeling
working out in
already.
other
Like
ways.
they're splintering, but the story of Livewire, I was so shocked at how much they focused on her, but I loved it. She had such a great story in taking her from everything she'd known and basically being rescued by Harada and now turning on him. I think she described their relationship as as if he was her samurai mentor or something like that, and she had like betrayed him, so he was just like sending her out and outcasting her. Awesome, love it. And now I guess what I'm looking forward to is her first ongoing series. I know it's been going on now; it's issue 9, I believe, but I haven't jumped into it yet. And I'm working my way through Unity, and I know I need to go to Harbinger Wars #2, but I really want to dive into the Livewire series, so I might read that first and then backtrack to Harbinger Wars 2. But that is pretty much it. We've talked about these big publishers, and here I am again. Image was what I enjoyed this week. Valiant still what I'm reading. Waiting on these big two to catch up.
What about you, Arby?
Arby?
Or me? Arby. Go to Arby.
Um, so I didn't actually get to read a whole lot this week. It's been really busy with work and all that good stuff. But I did get to read some Valiant. Actually, for our sister show, Valiant Watch, I think is what we decided.
We should have plugged that, huh?
Yeah. Well, we are right now.
Right now.
So,
Minutes before the end of the podcast.
yeah, if you made it this far, check out our other show, Valiant Watch. By the time
Apparently you like us.
yeah, and we're sorry. So I got to read all those books, which I'm on bandwagon with Nick. I think they're fantastic. I love everything that they're doing right now. The big two needs to shape up. I was actually just looking at the drive to see what I wanted to read this week. Out of their selection, it's maybe 10% of the books that they're putting out that I'm even interested in, and it's almost like a forced read. Like, oh, I like this title or I like this character, so I'm going to read it. It's not like, oh, I need to get this. Like, there's not a whole lot of excitement with a lot of their books. Doesn't mean that they're bad. It's just I'm not feeling like I like their direction that they're at right now. DC especially, because, for the last 2 years since Rebirth, I actually prefer DC over Marvel, and I'm kind of at the point right now where I prefer kind of Marvel over DC. But what I'm really liking is the indies more than the big two right now. What I'm looking forward to is a book by, I think it's by Image, Coffin Bound. I reviewed it, the first issue. I should know this, but I don't. So,
It's from Image.
yeah, that's all I know. It's a good book. Go check it out when it comes out. That's all I got.
As for me, what I have been reading, I actually picked up some old Valiant last week. So I read the first. I read the first few issues of Secret Weapons, which was like OG Unity kind of. It was Exo Man of War and Eternal Warrior and Solar, and I think there was one other. Oh, and Livewire, old Livewire, who was a white chick with red hair, who had magnetism powers instead of being a technopath. It's the big guy. There's a big guy who gains mass and gets bigger and bigger. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. But they're in a team and they fight Dr. Eclipse, who's Solar's archenemy, who is powered up by what's his face from Shadow Man. You know the one. Patrick Zercher drew him to look just like Clark Kent with scars. Um, yeah, that's the one. So that was good. And then I read the original, or not the original, the Second Life of Dr. Mirage, which was a 1993 series of Dr. Mirage, and some other stuff, some good stuff. As for what I'm looking forward to, from I think it's Vault Comics, The Plot is coming out soon, which is Michael Moretti, who writes Wasted Space and has Maul out from Vault Comics this week. And then it's drawn by, God, I'm drawing a total blank on his name. It's the guy who drew Shanghai Red with Christopher Sabella, which was just an amazing book. Like fantastic miniseries from Image. Might have been Image. I should know. But yeah, I'm just so excited for this book. It's like a dark horror book. Moretti was sharing some cool stuff about it, including it got written up in the New York Times. Can you imagine a book from Vault Comics being written up in the New York Times?
They're coming
That
up,
is so
and
cool.
Vault's doing cool stuff, and they're finally getting noticed for their good work. It's great.
Well, and then Moretti's also like he's kind of their superstar. He's signed exclusive with them right now, and to a multimedia deal actually that includes a Wasted Space podcast or audio format thing that comes out in November, I want to say. And Wasted Space was selling or is selling so well that it was upgraded to an ongoing. So the second arc of Wasted Space starts in November, which is so cool. The first few issues of that went to like 4 printings each. Like the first like 5 or 6 issues. It's a really fun series drawn by Hayden Sherman, who drew Cold War, also with Christopher Sabella. That was on Aftershock Comics. But yeah, The Plot. That's what I'm excited for. It's gonna be real good. I think Jacob Phillips, who is the colorist for Sean Phillips, now that Elizabeth Brettweiser is doing other stuff, Jacob Phillips has a project coming that he has not said what it is, but I've been watching his Twitter closely. He for a few years now has had like sketches and stuff in the back of Ed Brubaker's books. Ed Brubaker likes to have like a little pulpy kind of letters section / essays and stuff like that. He's had illustrations back there, and they're always really good. So if he's drawing like a full interior comic book, I will be getting that. So I guess that's my second. What I'll be looking forward to, very far in the future. Not that far. All right. Well, I guess that's it for the podcast this week. Cody and Matt send their condolences that they did not make it for these books they did not like. Cody might have liked Millennium. I can't remember.
Cody was prepared to give us some insight on how to approach Millennium in a way that we could enjoy. So we missed out a little bit on that one, but ultimately it's disappointing.
All right. Well, I guess that's it for the podcast. Thank you if you've borne with us this long. Come and see us again sometime. You can find us anywhere your proper podcasts are distributed. I'm not good. Podbean, iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, some other ones, Podcast Addict.
In Google, if you want to find us, type in Comic Watch. You can always check us out at www.comicwatch or comic-watch.com. We are out. Thank you.
Bye.